does the Scripture say according to Romans 4? How is one justified before God? For the Scripture is our authority. For the Scripture says, let God be true and every man a liar. What then shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. So from the very get-go, the Apostle Paul is making it clear that how one is justified is not by obedience to the law, but is by believing in what God has promised. And what is that promise that God made to Abraham in the Old Covenant? Just briefly stated that it would be through him all nations would be blessed. That a seed would come from Abraham, in which through this seed, those who are unrighteous, sinners in the eyes of God, by believing in him, they would become righteous. It then goes on to say, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Now to the one who works, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as his due. So if you have a soteriology in which the means by which you receive salvation is by your works, then what that does is it nullifies the gift of God. It's no longer a gift that you receive freely because of God's grace through the instrumentality of faith, but you are now receiving this salvation based upon your works. And so you remove salvation as a gift, and now it's your wage. It's what God owes you because of how you have lived your life. And if you know the context of the book of Romans, we understand that in the previous chapter, in Romans 3:19 through 20, the Apostle Paul goes on to say, now we know that no one is justified by works of the law, for it's through the law that comes knowledge of sin. So the law is not a means by which God gave to sinners, so that one day there would be hopes from God that a sinner would perfectly obey God's law. That's an impossibility, my friends. The law was given to bring knowledge of sin. This is what God's law brings forth to the conscience of sinful people, because the law of God is a reflection of his character. The Scripture says in the same book of Romans that the commandments are good, holy, and righteous. But when we as sinners look at God's law, specifically the 10 Commandments, we see our sin. This is why this same law, which is a reflection of God's glory, is also understood as the law of sin and death. Because when the sinner looks at God's law and their conscience bears witness that they have violated God's law, it's only then that the conscience bears witness that they are a sinner and that they stand condemned before God. For what is the curse of sin? It is death.